As Jia walked away from Min Ho with Tae Jun and Jaemin beside her, the elegant cocktail atmosphere of the Rose Garden began to shift into something far more intense and dramatic. Behind them, Haiwon's voice was rising with each word, sharp with confusion and growing distress. Min Ho appa, what is she talking about? You have children? You told me you'd never been seriously involved with anyone before me. The whispered conversations that had started around Min Ho's group were spreading through the crowd like wildfire, creating an undercurrent of excitement that transformed the wedding reception into something resembling a public revelation. Jia guided the boys toward a quieter section of the terrace near the fountain where they could observe without being in the direct center of attention. But even as she moved away from the confrontation, she could feel the weight of hundreds of curious gazes as word spread through the assembled guests. Oma, Tae Jun said quietly, accepting a glass of sparkling cider from a passing waiter. That man, Mr. Choi, he looked like he'd seen a ghost when he saw us. In a way, he did, Agia, Jia replied, watching the drama unfold across the terrace. Sometimes people are surprised by the consequences of their choices. Jaemin, ever the more emotionally perceptive of the twins, looked thoughtful as he studied the growing commotion around Min Ho. Are you okay? You seem different. Strong, but different. Before Jia could answer, Senator Kim's wife appeared at her elbow, her face flushed with excitement and barely contained concern. My dear, she said in a stage whisper that carried clearly to nearby guests. Is it true? Are those boys Choi Min Ho-sai's sons? Jia nodded calmly, maintaining her composure despite the intensity of the moment. Yes, they are. Senator Kim's wife's expression shifted from curiosity to genuine shock. But I had no idea he'd been married before. And such handsome, well-mannered boys. They're clearly exceptional children. The conversation was drawing attention from other guests who were trying to look like they weren't eavesdropping while obviously hanging on every word. How long were you married? Asked Deputy Mayor Lee, who had appeared as if drawn by the magnetic pull of developing revelation. 3 years. Jia replied evenly. We divorced when I was pregnant with the twins. A collective gasp rose from the growing circle of listeners. Deputy Mayor Lee's professional composure cracked as he processed the implications. He left you when you were pregnant with twins? Min Ho-si made his position very clear, Jia said with measured calm. He wasn't interested in being a father. Aigu, breathed Judge Park, who had joined the growing audience. That poor girl over there is about to marry a man who left his pregnant wife and newborn children. Across the terrace, the drama was escalating rapidly. Haiwon's voice had risen to a pitch that was carrying clearly across the entire garden, and Min Ho looked increasingly desperate as he tried to explain or defend himself to his bride and the growing circle of shocked guests surrounding them. You left your pregnant wife? Haiwon's voice cracked with disbelief and growing distress. Min Ho appa, how could you not tell me something like this? How could you keep this from me for 2 entire years? It's complicated. Min Ho's voice carried across the crowd, sounding weak and defensive. You don't understand the circumstances. Complicated. Haiwon's voice was sharp. What's complicated about being a decent person? What's complicated about taking care of your own children? Jia watched as more prominent guests began to gravitate toward the confrontation, drawn by the spectacle and clearly troubled by what they were learning about Min Ho's character. Senator Kim pushed through the crowd, his political instincts recognizing a moment of public judgment. Is this true, Choi Si? Did you really leave your pregnant wife and children? They weren't, I mean. The situation was Min Ho was stammering now, looking around desperately for support that clearly wasn't coming. The situation was that you called me worthless and walked away from your pregnant wife. Jia's voice cut through Min Ho's attempted explanation, carrying clearly across the increasingly quiet crowd. She hadn't moved from her position by the fountain, but her words reached every corner of the terrace. A visible shudder ran through the assembled guests as the full scope of Min Ho's actions became clear. You called her worthless? Deputy Mayor Lee's voice was filled with disapproval. A pregnant woman carrying your children, and you called her worthless? Mayor Hong stepped forward, his political authority lending weight to his words. Choi Si, I've supported your business ventures, attended your fundraisers, considered you a colleague. How could you keep something this important from all of us? I didn't lie exactly, Min Ho said desperately. I moved on. I started over, you abandoned them. Haiwan's voice broke with genuine emotional pain. What kind of person leaves a woman alone and pregnant with twins? What kind of person walks away from his own babies? The crowd had grown larger and more troubled with each revelation. Jia could see cell phones appearing as guests began recording what was clearly going to be talked about for months in Seoul's social circles. Yoon Sajing Nim, Judge Park, approached Jia with the kind of judicial gravity that commanded respect. I hope you don't mind my saying, but your sons are remarkable young men. I've been watching them handle this situation, and their composure is extraordinary. Thank you, Pensanim, Jia replied. They're the joy of my life. I can see why, the judge said, glancing toward the chaos surrounding Min Ho with undisguised disappointment. May I ask, and please tell me if I'm overstepping, but is it true that their father completely left when you were pregnant? Min Ho C made it clear that he wanted no part of our children's lives, Jia said simply. So I raised them on my own. Judge Park's expression darkened with professional disapproval. A man who walks away from his children isn't much of a man at all, in my opinion. You've clearly done an exceptional job raising them without him. Dr. Shin Hai-jin, Seoul's most prominent pediatrician, joined their conversation with obvious concern. I couldn't help but overhear. Those are beautiful, well-adjusted children, and they clearly adore you. Their father really left when you were pregnant? He made his choice, Jia said diplomatically, though her calm demeanor was making Min Ho's actions seem even more troubling by contrast. And clearly it was the wrong choice, Dr. Shin replied firmly. Those boys are exceptional, and you should be very proud of the job you've done raising them. As more guests approached to express their support and admiration, Jia realized that Min Ho's plan to show off his success had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Instead of appearing as the struggling ex-wife he'd expected, she was being embraced by the very society he'd hoped to impress. The guests were seeing her as the successful, dignified woman she'd become, while Min Ho was being revealed as someone who had made choices that deeply troubled them. Meanwhile, the confrontation between Min Ho and Hai-won was reaching a crescendo. The bride-to-be had attracted quite an audience, her voice rising with each word as her perfect wedding day dissolved into public turmoil. You told me I was your first real love, Hai-won was saying, her perfectly styled hair beginning to come loose as she gestured emotionally. You said you'd never been married before. You said you'd been waiting your whole life for someone like me. Hai-won, please let me explain, Min Ho began, but she cut him off with devastating clarity. Explain what? That you kept this from me about everything? That you have children you never mentioned? That you left a pregnant woman carrying your twins? Hai-won's voice broke completely. What kind of person does that? What kind of person can look at a pregnant woman and call her worthless? Jia found herself feeling an unexpected moment of compassion for Hai-won. However privileged the young woman might have seemed initially, she was genuinely shocked and hurt by these revelations. She was learning in the most public way possible that the man she was about to marry had made choices that troubled her deeply. Look at them, Senator Kim said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd as he gestured toward Jia and the twins. Look at those boys, Choi Si, your sons. Look at what their mother accomplished without you. Taejun stepped forward with remarkable poise for a 10-year-old, his voice clear and steady despite the chaos around them. Mr. Choi Si, he said, and the crowd quieted to hear him. Our Oma told us you didn't want children. She said you chose not to be part of our lives. We turned out fine without you, Jaemin added quietly, but his words carried like thunder in the stillness. Oma made sure we had everything we needed. We don't need anything from you now. The crowd murmured its approval, and Jia could see tears in several women's eyes as they watched these remarkable children speak with such dignity and maturity. Children shouldn't have to be this strong, whispered Mrs. Yoon, a society matron whose opinion could influence social reputations. They shouldn't have to speak for themselves about their own father's choices. Hai-won suddenly broke away from Min Ho and walked directly over to Jia, tears streaming down her face, her wedding makeup ruined beyond repair. I am so sorry, she said, taking Jia's hands in hers, her voice breaking with genuine emotion. I'm sorry for what he did to you. I'm sorry I almost married someone without knowing the kind of choices he's capable of making. You're not responsible for his choices, Jia replied gently, and even in her grace toward Hai-won, Everyone could see the fundamental kindness that Min Ho had been too blind to value. "Ladies and gentlemen," Haiwan announced, turning to address the crowd with the kind of emotional honesty that would be talked about for years to come. "There will be no wedding tonight. I cannot and will not marry a man who could walk away from a pregnant woman carrying his children and call her worthless. I cannot bind my life to someone who made such choices." The silence that followed was broken by a single sound of approval from Judge Park. Then Dr. Shin joined in, then Senator Kim. Within seconds, the entire crowd was showing their support for Haiwan's decision, their approval for her choice to step away from Min Ho. The sound of that applause, hundreds of Seoul's most influential people showing their support for Haiwan's decision, was profound. Jia watched Min Ho's face crumble as he realized that his entire social circle was not only troubled by his past choices, but actively supporting his bride's decision to walk away. "Haiwan, oh wait!" Min Ho called desperately as she began to walk away, her wedding dress trailing behind her. "Please, we can work through this." She stopped and turned back, her face showing a mixture of sadness and finality. "Work through this, Appa? You left newborn babies. You walked away from a woman who was pregnant with twins. There's no working through choices like that. There's no explanation that makes that acceptable." As Haiwan walked away, her exit marking the official end of Min Ho's wedding, the crowd began to disperse. But they didn't leave quietly. Each departure was marked by quiet words, guests making their feelings about Min Ho's past choices clearly understood. "Don't contact my office about those development permits," Senator Kim said firmly. "I need time to reconsider our professional relationship." "The Kim family endorsement is withdrawn from your projects," added his wife with equal clarity. "We need to think carefully about who we associate with." "My medical foundation will be reconsidering our office lease in your building," Dr. Shin declared. "We need to align ourselves with people whose values match our own." "The mayor's office will be reviewing all city contracts with your company," Mayor Hong announced with the authority of public office. "The people of Seoul deserve to know we work with people who demonstrate good character." One by one, some of the most influential people in Seoul quietly expressed their need to reconsider their relationships with Min Ho, not before stopping to express their admiration for Jia and her sons. "Yoon Sajing Nim, you've raised remarkable children," Judge Park said, offering respectful bows to Tae-jun and Jae-min. "It's clear they've had an exceptional Oma who taught them dignity and strength." "Thank you for your grace tonight," added Mrs. Yoon, the society matron whose approval Min Ho had always sought. "A lesser woman would have caused a scene. You've shown extraordinary character. I'd like to discuss having Elegance Events coordinate our foundation's annual gala," Senator Kim said, his business card appearing in Jia's hand. "After witnessing your composure and dignity tonight, I'm convinced you're exactly the kind of professional we want to work with." Min Ho stood alone by the fountain, watching his life's work begin to unravel as the very people he'd hoped to impress rushed to embrace the family he'd thrown away. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Jia surrounded by respect and admiration while he faced questions and reconsideration. As the crowd thinned and the last of the guests departed, Min Ho was left with the wreckage of his wedding and the inescapable knowledge of exactly what he'd lost through his own choices. The woman he'd called worthless had become everything that mattered to these people, while he had revealed himself to be someone whose past choices deeply troubled them. The Grand Shilla Hotel's Rose Garden had transformed from Choi Min Ho's moment of celebration into the stage for his most difficult realization. As the last of the wedding guests departed, leaving behind only scattered rose petals and the echoes of quiet conversations, Min Ho stood alone beside the fountain, where Haiwan's engagement ring still rested on the stone ledge. The silence was deep after the intensity of the past hour. Min Ho picked up the diamond ring, a 3-carat symbol of the life he had believed he was building, and turned it over in his trembling hands. Just 2 hours earlier, he had been preparing for the social event of the season. Now he was alone, publicly questioned by his bride and reevaluated by every person whose opinion carried weight in Seoul's business and social circles. Choi Si, a hotel staff member, approached carefully. "Sir, we need to begin clearing the area. The ballroom dinner has been cancelled." Min Ho looked up at the young man, hardly recognizing his own voice when he replied, "Yes, of course. Send the final bills to my office." But even as he said it, Min Ho knew that his professional standing might never be the same. The connections he had spent 15 years cultivating had started to come apart in the space of a single evening. Min-ho sat in his lawyer's office, staring at a stack of documents that represented the beginning of serious changes. His attorney, Mr. Kwon, looked uneasy as he reviewed the papers spread across his desk. The Kim family has officially withdrawn their political support from your Gangnam development project, Mr. Kwon said carefully. The Hangang View project will face significant delays without their endorsement. The city council is reconsidering the zoning approvals. Min-ho nodded slowly. The Hangang View development had been his flagship project, a 50 billion won luxury residential complex that would have solidified his reputation as one of Seoul's leading developers. What about the other projects? Mr. Kwon checked his notes with measured precision. The mayor's office has announced they're reviewing all existing contracts with Choi Development for compliance reasons. That's cautious wording for we're inspecting everything closely. And Judge Park, his family's legal matters have been transferred to another firm. But that isn't the most urgent concern. Mr. Kwon leaned forward, his tone grave. 3 of your major investors called this morning. They've requested meetings to discuss project timelines and partnership alignment. That's business language for reconsidering their commitment. They're concerned about how recent situations might influence the company's image. Min-ho felt the room tilt slightly around him. The Samsung project was his company's largest undertaking, a mixed-use development that had required 2 years of preparation and represented nearly 60% of his firm's expected revenue for the next 3 years. How serious is this? Min-ho asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the reply. If the Samsung project loses investors, you're facing major financial restructuring, Mr. Kwon said steadily. The investors want assurance about the company's future. The bank is reassessing your construction loans. And there's something else. Mr. Kwon hesitated, a sign that was never promising. What is it? Your former spouse's settlement case is being reviewed. Someone filed a claim with the family court suggesting that assets might not have been completely disclosed during the proceedings 10 years ago. Min-ho's pulse quickened. That can't be right. We disclosed everything, did you? Mr. Kwon's tone sharpened slightly. Because I've been going through the old files, and there are inconsistencies. The Choi family trust, for example. You had a considerable inheritance from your grandmother that wasn't listed in the settlement. The grandmother's trust. Min-ho had nearly forgotten about it. 200 million won sitting in a separate account managed by a family friend. He had convinced himself it didn't apply because he'd never used it during his marriage to Jia. If the court concludes that assets were not fully disclosed, Mr. Kwon continued, Yoon-si could be entitled to a revised settlement, potentially half of everything from that period, plus adjustments for the past 10 years. We're talking about several 100 million won. Min-ho sank back into his chair, finally grasping the full scale of what was unfolding. It wasn't just his projects being questioned, his entire financial foundation was now under scrutiny. The situation had spread beyond Han River City's social circles into the business community with surprising speed. The Daily Chronicle's Society section had run a thoughtful piece about the cancelled wedding under the headline, When Past Choices Meet Present Consequences, a Han River wedding's unexpected turn. But it was the follow-up story in the business section that truly affected Min-ho's professional standing. Choi Development Group faces partner questions. Contract reviews describe the city's close look at his business agreements, the civic office's review of his decade-old arrangement, and the withdrawal of investors and partners who were reconsidering their connections. Min-ho's phone, once constantly buzzing with opportunities and invitations, had grown quiet. His assistant had asked to move to another department, saying she needed a change of environment. 3 of his most experienced project managers had joined other companies. Most difficult of all was the call from his financial advisor, Mr. Lee Sang-woo, a man Min-ho had trusted for more than 8 years. I'm sorry, Min-ho-si, Sang-woo had said, his voice genuinely regretful. But the review team met last night. We need to recheck the terms of your ongoing projects, all of them. Sang-woo Hyung. You know my work is solid. This is just temporary. It's not about the projects, Min-ho-ya. It's about perception. The organization needs to be careful about associations. Our board includes several respected people who attended your ceremony. They've expressed concerns about moving forward without another review. Min-ho had ended the call and sat in his quiet office, looking out at the Han River skyline he'd once felt so connected to. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. He was no longer seen as a rising star in the city's development world. He was someone whose past choices were being carefully examined. The internal restructuring had been swift and humbling. Min-ho sat in a meeting room, signing documents that represented significant changes to his company. Attorney Kwon guided him through file after file with professional calm. The Riverside Heights project has been scaled back significantly, Attorney Kwon said without emotion. After investor withdrawals and the revised budget, we're looking at a 60% reduction in scope. The Central District Suite has been sold to balance outstanding costs after the deductions that brought in about 800 million won. Your investment portfolio has been adjusted to maintain cash flow. Min-ho signed each paper mechanically, watching his life's work turn into a series of official documents and balance sheets. What about the civic office's agreement review? Attorney Kwon consulted his notes. The court reached an understanding with UNASI's representatives. You'll be paying a revised amount of 850 million won covering previous obligations and adjustments, plus legal considerations. The payment plan extends over 5 years. Nearly 1 billion won to Yuna money she would probably invest in her successful business or her son's education. The irony was profound. Where does that leave me financially? After all obligations are met, you'll have approximately 500 million won in accessible funds. No major properties, reduced business holdings, and a company that needs full rebuilding. You'll need to reconsider your approach moving forward. Reconsider his approach. Min-ho, who had once led a multi-billion won development company, who had dined with mayors and officials, would need to completely rebuild his professional reputation. Min-ho stood in the modest lobby of Park and Partners, a mid-tier firm specializing in commercial makeovers and small residential projects, exactly the kind of work he'd once thought beneath him. He wore one of his remaining good suits and carried a portfolio that felt like a quiet confession of changed circumstances. Choi Si, the receptionist's voice was calm, but Min-ho could see the recognition in her eyes. Everyone in Han River City's real estate circle knew his story by now. I have an appointment with Director Park about the senior associate position. Park Jin-woo was a man Min-ho had once dismissed as small-time, someone who handled projects that weren't worth a major developer's attention. Now Min-ho was hoping Park would give him a chance to rebuild his career. Min-ho see, Park said, greeting him with cautious professionalism. Thank you for coming in. Please, sit down.